Alright, so when we get to the front of the truck, first thing I'm going to talk about, my 3 L's. I'm going to look for my lights, my leaks under the truck. I'm going to look for my leans, make sure my truck is not leaning. I'm going to look for leaks under my truck, nothing is leaking. Things you look for is leaking is power steering, coolant, oil, windshield washer fluid. That's the things you want to look for leaking. I'm going to look for my leans, make sure my truck is not leaning. If your truck is leaning, it could indicate a blown airbag, indicate a blown tire. If it's leaning, something isn't right. Now I'm going to move up to my clearance lights. Be the first thing I start at. Properly mounted and secured. All my nuts and bolts are present and tight. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. And the color is amber. Have to indicate that. I'll move down to my windshield. It's a 2-part windshield. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken. It is properly mounted and secured. You have a rubber seal going around. There's no abrasion, bumps, or cuts in my seal, and it is not leaking. Nothing obstructing your view. These are your windshield wipers and your windshield wiper blades. They're properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. Your windshield wipers should be flush against the window. Should have no abrasion, bumps, or cuts in the blades. I'm going to move down the truck to my mirror. My mirror is properly mounted and secured. All my nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. It's free of obstruction. No illegal stickers. It is clear. We're going to move down to my headlight. Headlights are clear. You have a 4-way, a turn signal. You have a marker, a reflector. You have a low beam headlight, and you have a high beam headlight. It is properly mounted and secured. All my nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. You're going to move over to your license plate. Your license plate properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked, bent, or broken, and it is up to date. When I pop the hood, I'm going to go to the passenger side. When I get here, first thing I'm going to look for is abrasion, bumps, or cuts in any of my lines. All my nuts and bolts are present and tight. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken. Nothing is leaking overall. Now I'm going to move to my exhaust. It's properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. Nothing makes a loud noise when I start my truck from the exhaust. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. There is no indicating of soot, which means the exhaust is not leaking. I'm going to move forward to my alternator. It is properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. The wires have no abrasion, bumps, or cuts. Illegal tape. There is no indicating that it has been burnt, so therefore it has not shorted out. My alternator is belt driven. This is my belt. It's properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. There should be no abrasion, bumps, or cuts on my belt. No frays. No more than 3/4 inch play. When I move down to the water pump, if you want to find your water pump, you go to your radiator, go to the bottom of the radiator, find your hose. This will take you right to your water pump every time. Follow it, follow your hose down. It's going to go to your water pump right here. Properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. After you do the water pump, you're going to go to your windshield washer reservoir. Your cap is on hand tight. It is properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken, and it is not leaking. It should be full. All right, so that covers everything for the passenger side. Now we're going to move around and go to the driver's side. So the first thing I'm going to go to is my radiator reservoir. It is properly mounted and secured. All my nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken, and it is not leaking. My cap should be on hand tight. It is between minimum and maximum with the coolant level. This is where it should be. Overall, I'm going to look at my lines, make sure there's no abrasion, bumps, or cuts in any of my lines. Anything that has air going through it or rubber, no abrasion, bumps, or cuts, and it should not be leaking air, coolant, water, anything. I'm going to go down to my oil dipstick. If I want to check the oil, I'm going to pull the dipstick out. I'm going to wipe the stick off. I'm going to put it back in, pull it out. I'm going to read it. I'm never going to add oil unless my dipstick is below the add mark. This is not cracked, bent, or broken. It is properly mounted and secured. It is not leaking. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. Now I'm going to move to my air compressor. It is properly mounted and secured. All my nuts and bolts are present and tight. And this is also gear driven. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken, and this is not leaking. You have your power steering pump, which is gear driven. You have your power steering reservoir, your power steering gearbox. They are all three properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken, and they are not leaking. Your reservoir should be between minimum and maximum. Your cap should be on hand tight. Your hoses should have no abrasion bumps or cuts, and your clamp should be properly mounted and secured. My power steering pump is gear driven. I'm going to go to my steering arm, properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. You have a lower and an upper universal joint. It should be well lubricated. It's your power steering gearbox. It is properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken, and it is not leaking. All right, you got a Pitman arm, fully mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. You got a drag link. You got an upper and lower control arm and a tie rod. They're all three properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts present and tight, not cracked, bent, or broken. You have 3 castle nuts with 3 cotter keys. You have them at each joint. You have one on the drag link and Pitman arm. You have one on the drag link and control arm. One on the tie rod and control arm. You have your airlines, ABS wire. There's no abrasion bumps or cuts. They're properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight, and they are not leaking. You have your air canister and clamp, properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. Move down to your slack adjuster and push rod, properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. And you should have no more than 1 inch of play when your brakes are released. You got your leaf springs with your U-bolts. You got a front and a rear mount with bushings. There's no abrasion bumps or cuts in my bushings. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It's properly mounted and secured. You got your U-bolts. You got an upper and lower shock mount with the shock. It's properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. And the shock is not leaking. You got your brake shoes and your brake drum. They are free of debris, properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. You should have no less than 1/4 inch brake pad on your brake shoes. It's free of old grease and debris. There's no illegal welds. All right, then you're gonna move to your tire. You should have no less than 4 30-seconds tread on the tire. Do your TCP, your tread should be worn evenly. Condition, no abrasion bumps or cuts on your tires. Pressure should be stamped on the side of your tire or on the side of your truck for company specifications. And you're gonna move down to your rim. Your rim, properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. There is no illegal welds. You're gonna move down to your lug nuts and your wheel hub bolts. They're all properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. If you see rust coming off of your lug nuts, that could indicate a loose lug nut. You wanna check the fluid in this. You wanna pull this cap off, put your finger into your first knuckle, and if it comes up to your first knuckle, you have normal operating fluids. You got a metal valve stem and a metal cap. It's properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken, and it holds back air so it cannot be leaking. You have your turn signal, your 4-way, your reflector, and a marker. Color is amber. It is properly mounted and secured. All my nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. I'm gonna work my way down to the side of the door. First thing I see on the door is my mirror. I'm gonna start on my mirror. It's properly mounted and secured. All my nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. No illegal stickers. It is clean and free of debris. All right, then you're gonna move down to the door. You wanna open the door. You wanna shut it. You wanna make sure it stays shut. You wanna open it back up. And you have a 2-part seal. You wanna talk about your outer seal. You wanna talk about your inner seal. This is for exhaust fumes. If your exhaust is leaking, it will not get in the cab with you. Should be no abrasion, bumps, or cuts in either one of your seals. It is properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. This is your battery box. It's properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. Pull the cover off. You want to check out your batteries. Make sure your batteries have no acid leaking. All your nuts and bolts are present and tight. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken. There's no abrasion, bumps, or cuts, or illegal tape on any of your wires. So you have a diesel exhaust fluid, you have a cap, you have a strap, and you have a tank. They're all properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. Overall, it is not leaking. My cap is on hand tight. All right, you have your steps. There's 4 steps on the truck. They're free of debris. They're properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. You have a fuel tank. You have your fuel tank straps, your fuel tank rubber grommet. You have your fuel tank cap. They are all properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. They are not cracked, bent, or broken. There's no abrasion, bumps, or cuts in any of my rubber grommets. My cap is on hand tight. When I pull it off, I'm going to check my chain, make sure it's properly mounted and secured. I'm going to put it back on hand tight. Look back, make sure it is not leaking overall. All right, catwalk, properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. It is free of debris. Now, this is your emergency and your service line for your trailer brakes. It's all properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. You got your other end of your electrical wire. All right, you're gonna pull the electrical line out. You're gonna check for all your female connectors. Make sure nothing is bent, cracked, bent, or broken. They are all properly mounted and secured. There's no abrasion, bumps, or cuts in my wires. There's no indicating that anything was burnt. All right, so you're gonna come up here. Make sure everything's properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. Now you have metal pins inside of this that go into your electrical wire, into your female electrical wire. So you're gonna make sure you plug that in and it's working properly. The air lines in your electrical wire should be properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts present and tight, not cracked, bent, or broken. It should be 16 to 18 inches off the ground, right? Now your glide hands, you're gonna do the same thing on this side. You're gonna look down inside the electrical wire. All the female ends should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. There should be no melted plastic or anything indicating something has been hot. You got your glide hands, you got the glide hand bolts. They're properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. Now you have your rubber, should be free of debris. Should not be no abrasion, bumps, or cuts in your rubber. All right, we're gonna start with the frame. It's properly mounted and secured. All your cross members, properly mounted and secured. All your nuts and bolts are present and tight. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. Now you have your air spring. All your nuts and bolts present and tight. It's properly mounted and secured. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken. Right, you got your front mount. You have a 2-part brake canister, you have 2 clamps, and your air lines. They're all properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking. You have a push rod and a slack adjuster in the back. They're properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken. You have no abrasion, bumps, or cuts in your air lines, and they are not leaking any kind of air. You got a shock. An upper and lower mount with a shock, properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken, and it is not leaking. All right, you have an airbag. It is made of rubber, so it cannot have any abrasion, bumps, or cuts. It is properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. You have an upper and a lower mount on your airbag. All right, you have your bud rim. It should be flushed against with each other because this is a dually tire. There should be no illegal welds, no cracks on your rims. They're properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. My tire should have no less than 2/32 of tread in the rear tire. We're gonna do TCP. Tread should be evenly worn. Should not be low over here, high over here. Condition, we're gonna do the rear sidewall. And then we're gonna do the front sidewall as well. My rear sidewall, there is no abrasion, bumps, or cuts. It looks good. On my front sidewall, no abrasion, bumps, or cuts. Looks good. My pressure, I would check on the front of my tire. Also check this for abrasion, bumps, or cuts. Looks good. I would go to my factory stamp to find my air pressure. And if not, it would be to company specification, which would be stamped on the side of your truck. And you come down to your rim, make sure it's properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked, bent, or broken, and there's no illegal welds on your rim. Your valve stem is metal with a metal cap. It is properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken, and it is not leaking. This holds back air so it cannot be leaking. Your lug nuts are properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. They are not cracked, bent, or broken. And there should be no rust coming off of your lug nuts. That would indicate a loose lug nut. This is your axle hub. It's properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken, and it is not leaking. You have your drive shaft. You have your U-joint. Properly mounted and secured. All my nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. It is free of debris. All right, I'm gonna start at my fifth wheel sliding rail. You have a fifth wheel sliding rail mount and a fifth wheel sliding rail bolt. They are all properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken. All right, you got your fifth wheel release pin. You got your fifth wheel gate and your fifth wheel sliding plate and a fifth wheel pivot pin. They're all properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. They're not cracked, bent, or broken, and it is well lubricated. Mud flap, properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken, and your mud flap should be no more than 2 to 8 inches off of the ground. Cross member is properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not no illegal welds, and there is no illegal holes that have been drilled in it. Here you have 2 brake lights, 2 turn signals, 2 four-ways, 2 reflectors, and 2 markers. They're all properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight, not cracked, bent, or broken. Color is red. Now you have a reverse light and a tag light. Color is clear. They are properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. They are not cracked, bent, or broken. Your locking jaws are properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. And when you put your kingpin into the locking jaws, your locking jaws lock. You'll see a bar right here indicating your trailer is locked to the fifth wheel.
And remember, thorough inspection, proper maintenance, and good communication always makes for a safe trip. Don't forget to subscribe and look for another Sims Crane Minute coming soon.